the second leg of Benjamin Netanyahu's four-nation tour. Israel's Prime Minister spent much of Monday in Uganda seeking to rebuild bridges. And on Tuesday, that mission moved on to neighboring Kenya.
We are already working for some time at relaunching in a big way our mutual relationship, the relationship between Kenya and Israel, and through it, in many ways, the relationship between Israel and Africa.
And I'm really hoping that this visit, as a follow-up also to the visit that I made to Israel in the earlier part of this year, is going to begin a new stint of very close collaboration between Kenya and Israel.
The two signed several agreements in areas such as health, agriculture and water resources. But security matters dominated. Israel already has been drawn into the challenges facing Kenya. Its citizens on Westgate, the upmarket mall attacked by Somali militants Al-Shabaab in 2013. Israel also has been helping Kenya to beef up security, and Netanyahu is promising more help in gathering intelligence. Apart from trade and security, this visit was all about strengthening ties with African nations. And Mr. Netanyahu appears to have hit the right note with African leaders when he said that attempts by Western allies to impose democracies on Africa and the Middle East had contributed to extremism. Netanyahu is hoping this tour will rally support for Israel. Its policy on Palestine has been deeply unpopular across much of the continent. His next stop, Rwanda on Wednesday, and then Ethiopia. And again, he's to meet leaders of both countries. Robert Magela, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
Let's get some more analysis and insight on this story. CCTV Stephanie Fred is standing by for us in Tel Aviv. And Dr. Adam Talo from the Institute of Diplomacy at the University of Nairobi is joining me here live in our Nairobi studio. To you both, welcome. And Dr. Talo, I'll start off with you now. Prime Minister Netanyahu has reiterated that his Africa trip symbolizes Israel's return to Africa and Africa's return to Israel. Why is it important at this point for Israel to reignite its ties with Africa?
Well, I think basically you have to go back to the history, and you'll find that after the Yom Kippur War, basically Israel and Arab states, most African countries did cut ties with Israel, and already seemed in the 1990s. But even so, you'll find that no other prime minister has visited Africa for nearly 3 decades. I think it was Isaac Shamir who last visited in 1987. So this is really a reawakening. The other issue that one has to look at is that most African countries had issues with Israel because it did support apartheid South Africa, and therefore this provides an opportunity for them to close that past history of issues that has put it at par with African countries in general.
Right. Stephanie, though, yesterday was quite symbolic in Entebbe, where Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he was in Uganda, though, how is this four-nation African tour being covered, though, by Israeli media?
Well, Israeli media has had a mix of criticism, for sure, and the criticism at times has been rather harsh. Why critical, or what have they been critical about? One commentator said that perhaps Mr. Netanyahu suggested that he is using his public position, or used his public position in Entebbe, Uganda, to hold a memorial ceremony for his brother. As a reminder to viewers, the memorial ceremony that was held there at the airport was commemorating 40 years to a commando raid, an Israeli commando raid into Uganda to rescue more than 100 hostages that were held there. The person who led that raid was Prime Minister Netanyahu's brother, Yonatan, and he was killed there on the spot. So that has been one criticism. Another criticism has also been that it's costly and it's costing the taxpayers in Israel quite a bit of money. They're looking at the numbers of business people who are traveling with the Prime Minister, which totals 80 at least. And they're saying, the media is saying here, that the price tag on this trip is more than $7 million to the taxpayers, including security and so on. The Prime Minister's office refutes that number, saying it's closer to a $2 or $3 million mark, and also says that those business people traveling with Mr. Netanyahu in the hopes of creating ties between Israeli and African businesses, they're traveling at their own expenses. Beatrice.
Dr. Olo, for the African countries, though, that are seeking closer ties with Israel following this trip, why would African countries be seeking closer ties with Israel?
Well, basically, you'll find that of late, especially in the 21st century, terrorism has become a global issue. And you'll find that quite a number of African countries are facing radical Islam. And therefore, from Nigeria, Boko Haram, to Al-Shabaab in the Eastern African area. Therefore, you find that in that case, then they'll find that they have something in common with Israel. And you'll find that especially for the East African countries, Uganda and Kenya, which suffered terrorist attacks, it was Israel that always arrived first to try and help in securing and even disaster management. The other issue basically would be in terms of trade, because Israel, as we have just heard from Stephanie there, is traveling with nearly 70 to 80 business magnates, and also with expert advice on irrigation, especially in agriculture and so on. And therefore, basically, in the spirit of diversifying their economies, Africa is opening up. And of course, Israel will expect in return maybe support at the UN, where they have always faced some bashing.
Right, and Stephanie, to you though, from Nairobi, Netanyahu is scheduled to visit Rwanda and Ethiopia. What should we expect from this visit?
Well, first stop, Rwanda. In Rwanda, the most notable visit that he'll make there is at the Kigali Genocide Memorial. And why is that notable? Because, of course, he's going to pay his respects to the more than 800,000 Hutus that were killed at the hands of the Tutsis in the 1994 genocide. What he's trying to do there is build a collective bridge with the Rwandan people, looking at the Jewish past and the genocide of 6 million Jews who were killed at the hands of Nazi Germany during World War II. On to Ethiopia, there certainly is a long-standing relationship there. Many Ethiopian Jews brought to Israel with the cooperation of the Ethiopian government in two separate instances historically. So just to continue with strengthened ties, and again, as your guest said, business is behind also all of this visit. Israel now has about 2% exports coming to Africa. They would certainly like to boost that number. Beatrice?
Right, Stephanie Fried joining us there from Tel Aviv, and Dr. Adam Zalo joining us here in Nairobi. To you both, thank you for your insights. Well, let's